I took the graveyard shift at Pinewood Retirement Home because I needed the money, and because I thought watching over sleeping elderly folks would be the easiest job in the world. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college with a useless degree in English literature and student loans that made my stomach hurt every time I checked my bank account. The pay was surprisingly decent for a small town. The hours were lonely, and I figured I could spend most of my nights studying for the graduate school entrance exams I kept telling myself I would eventually take. That was 3 months ago. Now I know that some jobs pay well for a reason, and that reason is usually because nobody else wants to do them. My name is Draven, and I'm about to tell you why I will never work another night shift again as long as I live, and why I jump at shadows every time the sun goes down. The building itself should have been my first warning, but I was desperate and broke, so I ignored all the obvious red flags that were practically screaming at me to run. Pinewood Retirement Home sat at the edge of Millbrook, a small town in rural Pennsylvania where everyone knew everyone. Strangers were noticed immediately, and people still talked about things that happened 30 years ago like they were yesterday. The facility was a 4-story brick structure that looked like it had been built sometime in the 1960s, with narrow hallways that seemed to stretch on forever, flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps, and that distinct institutional smell of antiseptic mixed with something older and mustier that no amount of cleaning could ever remove. The paint on the walls was a depressing shade of beige that made you feel tired just looking at it, and the carpets were worn thin in paths where countless feet had shuffled over the decades, creating dark trails that looked almost like burn marks in certain lighting. During the day, the place was filled with nurses in colorful scrubs, orderlies pushing medication carts, visiting family members carrying flowers and photo albums, and the general noise of life continuing despite age and illness. But at night, after 11 p.m., when the last visitor left and the day shift clocked out, it became something else entirely, something that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something I did not understand and did not want to understand. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something, and I really mean this. Have you ever worked a job that made you question reality itself? A place where things happened that you could not explain no matter how hard you tried. No matter how many logical explanations you came up with in the desperate hours of 3 a.m., when you were trying to convince yourself you had not seen what you knew you had seen. If you have experienced something similar, if you have worked somewhere that made you feel like the world was not quite what you thought it was, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes I wonder if I am the only one who has seen the things I have seen, or if there are others out there who understand what it is like to be trapped between the world we know and the world we pretend does not exist, because acknowledging it would break something fundamental in our understanding of reality. And if you are enjoying this story so far, if you want to hear more experiences like this, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps me share these experiences with more people, and honestly, it helps me feel less alone in all of this. Knowing that someone else is listening, that someone else might believe me, makes the nights a little easier to bear. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. My supervisor was a woman named Helen, a stern-faced nurse in her late 50s who had worked at Pinewood for over 30 years and had the kind of tired eyes that suggested she had seen things that would make most people quit on their first day. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun that looked like it was giving her a permanent headache, deep lines around her mouth that suggested she frowned far more than she smiled, and eyes that seemed to see right through any excuse you tried to give her. She did not waste time with small talk or pleasantries. On my first night after the day shift had cleared out, and the building had settled into that unnatural quiet that made my skin prickle with unease, she sat me down in the small office behind the nurse's station on the ground floor. The office was cramped and cluttered with filing cabinets, outdated medical equipment, and stacks of paperwork that looked like they had been accumulating since the building first opened. She cleared a space on the desk and slid a laminated sheet of paper across to me. The paper was yellowed at the edges like old newspaper, and the text was printed in a plain, bold font that looked like it had been typed on an old typewriter and then photocopied dozens, maybe hundreds of times over the years. "These are the rules for the graveyard shift," Helen said, her voice flat and businesslike, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed without question. "You will follow them exactly. No exceptions. No questions. No creative interpretations. No thinking you know better. Do you understand me, Draven?" I looked down at the paper, expecting some standard guidelines about checking on residents every hour, administering medications at specific times, or calling for help in medical emergencies. Instead, what I read made my skin prickle with unease and sent a cold sensation crawling down my spine like ice water. Graveyard shift rules for Pinewood retirement. Home Rule 1. If you hear the elevator moving to the 4th floor after midnight, do not go upstairs until it returns to the ground level on its own. Rule 2. If a resident asks you to help them find their room and they are wearing a yellow wristband, walk them back to the common area and wait exactly 5 minutes before checking the registry. Rule 3. Never enter room 237 if the door is already open. Close it from the hallway and report it in the logbook immediately. Rule 4. If you see someone standing at the end of the west hallway facing the wall, do not approach them or speak to them. Return to the nurse's station and wait until they are gone. Rule 5. If all the lights in the recreation room turn off simultaneously, do not turn them back on. Leave the room immediately and lock the door behind you until morning. Rule 6. If you hear humming coming from the garden courtyard between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., close all blinds facing the courtyard and do not look outside until the humming stops. I read through the list twice. Then a third time, my confusion growing with each reading. The rules were oddly specific, weirdly formal, and completely bizarre. They did not make any logical sense. I looked up at Helen with what must have been a very confused expression. Maybe even a slightly amused one, because part of me still thought this might be some elaborate prank they played on new employees. Is this some kind of joke? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Like hazing for the new guy? Her face did not change. Not even a flicker of humor or acknowledgement that my question was reasonable. No joke, you follow these rules, you will be fine. You will finish your shift, go home, collect your paycheck, and sleep soundly. You ignore them, you will not last long here. We have had 12 people in your position over the past 5 years. Only 3 of them made it past the first month. The others either quit after a few nights or... She trailed off, her eyes growing distant for a moment, staring at something I could not see, something in her memory that clearly bothered her even after all these years. Then she snapped back to focus, her gaze sharp again. Just follow the rules, Draven. That is all you need to do. That is all anyone needs to do. But what do they mean? I pressed, my curiosity getting the better of my common sense. Why can I not go to the 4th floor if the elevator moves? What is in room 237? Who is the person standing in the hallway? What happens if I break one of these rules? Are these safety protocols or something else? Helen stood up, pushing her chair back with a harsh scraping sound that made me wince. The conversation was clearly over. You will find out soon enough if you stay long enough. Or you will not if you are smart and just do what you are told. Either way, the rules are there for your protection, not for mine. I have been here 32 years and I have followed these rules every single night. That is why I am still here. She handed me a heavy flashlight that felt like it could double as a weapon, a ring of keys that jingled ominously, and a small radio clipped to my belt that crackled with static when she turned it on. Your shift starts now. Make your rounds every hour. Check on the residents. Fill out the logbook. Stay awake. Stay alert. And whatever you do, do not try to be a hero. Heroes do not last long on the graveyard shift. Good luck, Draven. You are going to need it. The first week was uneventful, almost boring in its mundane routine, and I started to relax into the job. I spent my nights walking the same hallways over and over, my flashlight beam cutting through the dim emergency lighting, checking on residents who were all fast asleep in their beds, their soft snores and the rhythmic beeping of medical monitors the only sounds breaking the silence. I filled out endless paperwork at the nurse's station, documenting everything from medication times to bathroom breaks, and I drank terrible instant coffee from the ancient machine in the break room that always tasted faintly of metal and regret. The building was quiet except for the occasional snore, the hum of the vending machine in the break room that sold expired candy bars and stale chips, and the buzz of the old fluorescent lights overhead that flickered just enough to be annoying, but not enough to justify replacing them. I saw nothing unusual, heard nothing strange, encountered no mysterious figures or moving elevators or open doors. I started to think that the rules were just some elaborate hazing ritual for new employees, a way to scare people and make the boring night shift seem more interesting than it actually was. Maybe Helen had a dark sense of humor that I had not picked up on. Maybe the previous workers had quit because the job was simply too dull, too isolating, too depressing, and they had made up stories to make themselves feel better about leaving, to give themselves a dramatic reason for not being able to handle it. But on my 8th night, everything changed, and I realized that the rules were not a joke at all. It was 12:47 a.m. when I heard it, and I will remember that exact time for the rest of my life. I was sitting at the nurse's station halfway through a cup of terrible instant coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, trying to stay awake by reading an old magazine someone had left behind. The building was quiet, that deep, oppressive quiet that only exists in the small hours of the morning when the whole world seems to be holding its breath. And then I heard it, the sound of the elevator echoing down the hallway, the mechanical whir of the motor that sounded louder than it should in the silence, the rattle of the cables like chains being dragged across stone, the soft ding as it reached a floor. I looked up at the indicator panel mounted on the wall next to the station, a relic from the 1980s with numbered lights that glowed dull orange. The elevator was moving, and it was going up. First floor, the light blinked. Second floor, another blink. Third floor, my heart started beating faster. Fourth floor, the light stopped on the number 4 and stayed there, glowing steadily like an accusing eye. I felt a chill run down my spine, that primitive instinct that tells you something is wrong, even when your rational mind is trying to come up with explanations. Rule 1. If you hear the elevator moving to the 4th floor after midnight, do not go upstairs until it returns to the ground level on its own. I stared at the panel, waiting for the elevator to come back down, telling myself it was just a malfunction, just old wiring, just someone who could not sleep going for a late-night walk. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. The light remained fixed on the 4th floor, unmoving, unwavering. My heart was pounding now, and I could feel sweat forming on the back of my neck, despite the cool air conditioning that was always set too cold. Why was the elevator not coming back down? Was someone up there? Was it stuck? Was it malfunctioning? Should I call maintenance? Should I go check? I stood up from the desk, my chair squeaking loudly in the silence, and walked to the hallway looking toward the elevator at the far end. The doors were closed. Everything looked normal. The hallway was empty, lit only by the emergency lights that cast long shadows across the worn carpet. But the indicator still showed the 4th floor. I thought about Helen's words. Do not try to be a hero. Just follow the rules. But what if someone was trapped up there? What if a resident had wandered into the elevator and was now confused and scared on the 4th floor? What if they needed help? I took a step toward the elevator, then stopped. The rules were specific. Do not go upstairs. Wait until it returns on its own. I forced myself to turn around and walk back to the nurse's station. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly, and tried to focus on the paperwork in front of me, but the words blurred together and I could not concentrate. I kept glancing at the indicator panel, watching that glowing number 4, willing it to change. I would wait. I would follow the rules. I had no reason not to. At 1:23 a.m., exactly 36 minutes after it had ascended, the elevator finally moved. I heard the motor whir to life again, and I watched with a mixture of relief and dread as the indicator light descended. 4th floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor, ground level. The elevator doors opened with a soft hiss that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet building, and I saw that the car was empty. Completely empty. No one got out. No one had been inside. The interior was spotless, the walls reflecting the harsh fluorescent light, the floor clean and unmarked. I stared at the open doors for a long moment, my mind racing through explanations. Maybe someone had gotten off on the 4th floor. Maybe the elevator was just malfunctioning and going up and down on its own. Maybe the indicator panel was broken and showing the wrong floor. But I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had seen. And deep down, in that part of me that still believed in things that went bump in the night, I knew that something had been in that elevator, something that had wanted to go to the 4th floor, something that did not want to be followed. I grabbed my flashlight with shaking hands and walked over to investigate, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The elevator interior was exactly as it always was. Nothing out of place, no sign that anyone had used it. The buttons were not worn or smudged. The floor was not scuffed. It was as if the elevator had simply decided to go for a joyride on its own. But I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The air inside the elevator was freezing, not just cool from the air conditioning, but genuinely cold, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. My breath misted in front of my face, and I could see frost forming on the metal handrail inside the car. I stepped back quickly, not wanting to enter the elevator, and turned back toward the nurse's station. My hands were trembling as I picked up the logbook, a thick leather-bound book that had been used for decades, its pages filled with entries in different handwriting, different inks, different years. I flipped to today's date and made a note of the incident. Elevator moved to 4th floor at 12:47 a.m., returned to ground level at 1:23 a.m. No passengers observed. Interior temperature abnormally cold. I paused, then added Rule 1 followed. As I wrote, I noticed the entries above mine from previous nights, previous workers. There were dozens of similar notes. Elevator moved to 4th floor. No passengers. Rule 1 followed. Some entries were brief and factual. Others had additional notes. Heard voices inside elevator car. Door opened and closed 3 times before ascending. Smelled something burning. The pattern went back years, entry after entry, night after night. Whatever was happening with the elevator was not new. It had been happening for a very long time. I closed the logbook and tried to calm my breathing. It was just a malfunction. Old buildings had old elevators. There was a logical explanation. There had to be. But as I sat there in the dim light of the nurse's station, listening to the building settle and creak around me, I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was waiting, that I had just passed the first test. The second incident happened 3 nights later, and it was worse because this time I actually saw something. I was making my rounds on the 2nd floor, checking each room to make sure the residents were safe and comfortable. Most of them were asleep, their soft breathing or occasional snore the only sound in the dim hallway lit by nightlights plugged into the wall every few feet. The 2nd floor housed the residents who needed minimal assistance, people who could still walk, still feed themselves, still maintain some independence. I checked each room methodically, shining my flashlight briefly inside to make sure everyone was in their beds, that no one had fallen, that no medical alarms were going off. Room 201, Mrs. Patterson sleeping peacefully. Room 203, Mr. Kowalski snoring loud enough to wake the dead. Room 205 empty, because the resident had been moved to hospice care downtown. Room 207, Miss Chen, I stopped. Helen had specifically told me not to use that name. I checked my clipboard. Room 207, Ms. Liu, sleeping soundly. I continued down the hallway, my routine so familiar now that I barely had to think about it. I was about to head back downstairs when I heard a voice behind me, soft and confused, like someone who had just woken from a deep sleep. "Excuse me, young man. Can you help me?" I seemed to have gotten lost. I turned around quickly, surprised because I had not heard anyone approach, and saw an elderly woman standing in the hallway. She was wearing a pale blue nightgown that looked thin and worn, and her white hair hung loose around her shoulders, uncombed and tangled. She looked confused, her eyes unfocused and watery, and she was wringing her hands together in a gesture of distress. But what caught my attention immediately, what made my heart skip a beat, was the wristband on her left arm. It was yellow, bright yellow, not the standard white wristbands that all the residents wore with their names and room numbers printed on them. This was different, and I knew immediately what it meant. Rule 2. If a resident asks you to help them find their room and they are wearing a yellow wristband, walk them back to the common area and wait exactly 5 minutes before checking the registry. Of course, I said, keeping my voice calm and gentle, the way we had been trained to speak to confused residents. "Let me help you." "What is your name?" "I cannot remember," she said, her voice trembling with fear and frustration. "I cannot remember where my room is. I cannot remember my name. I cannot remember anything. Everything is so dark and confusing. Please, I just want to go home. I just want to go back to where I belong." I felt a pang of sympathy for her. Dementia was cruel, stealing memories and leaving only confusion and fear, trapping people in their own minds where nothing made sense anymore. But I remembered the rules. I remembered Helen's stern face and her warning about following them exactly. I walked over to the woman and took her gently by the arm. Her skin was ice cold, colder than it should be even in the air-conditioned building, and she felt almost insubstantial, like she weighed nothing at all. "Let us go to the common area," I said softly. "You can sit down and rest there, and I will help you figure everything out. Does that sound okay?" She nodded, her eyes still distant and confused, and followed me without resistance. We walked slowly down the hallway, her shuffling steps barely making any sound on the thin carpet. I noticed that the other residents, even the ones who usually slept lightly and woke at the slightest noise, did not stir as we passed their rooms. The building seemed even quieter than usual, as if it was holding its breath. We descended the stairs to the ground floor, my flashlight beam bouncing ahead of us, and I led her to the common area, a large room with comfortable chairs arranged around a television, shelves filled with books and puzzles, and windows that looked out onto the garden courtyard. I helped her into one of the chairs, a faded blue recliner that faced away from the windows, and made sure she was comfortable. "Wait here for just a few minutes," I told her, speaking slowly and clearly. "I am going to check something, and then I will be right back to help you find your room. Can you wait here for me?" She nodded, her eyes still distant and confused, not really focusing on me or anything else. "I will wait," she whispered. "I am good at waiting. I have been waiting for a very long time." I looked at my watch. 2:34 a.m. I would wait exactly 5 minutes before checking the registry, just as the rule stated, no more, no less. I sat down in a chair across from her and watched her carefully. She did not move, did not speak. She just stared at her hands folded in her lap, her lips moving silently as if she was trying to remember something important, something just out of reach. Her fingers twitched occasionally, tracing patterns in the air that I could not understand. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. 2:35, 2:36, 2:37. I kept glancing at my watch, counting down the seconds, resisting the urge to get up early and check the registry. The rule said exactly 5 minutes. I had to follow it exactly. At precisely 2:39 a.m., 5 minutes after I had sat down, I stood up and walked to the nurse's station. The woman did not look up as I left. I pulled out the resident registry, a thick binder filled with names, room numbers, medical information, photographs, and detailed notes about each person living at Pinewood. I flipped through the pages looking for anyone who matched the description of the woman in the common area. White hair, pale blue nightgown, elderly female, confused. There were several possibilities. I narrowed it down by looking for anyone who might wear a yellow wristband. Yellow usually meant special care, high risk of wandering, advanced dementia, and then I found her. Or rather, I found her photograph. The picture showed a woman with white hair and the same watery, unfocused eyes, wearing the same pale blue nightgown I had just seen. Her name was Margaret Holloway, room 3 at 12. But next to her photograph, stamped in red ink that had faded slightly with age, was a single word that made my blood run cold and my hands start shaking. Deceased, date of death, September 14th, 2019. Cause of death, heart failure. Time of death, 2:34 a.m. I stared at the page, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This could not be right. The woman was sitting in the common area right now. I had just spoken to her. I had just walked her downstairs. I had felt her arm under my hand. She was real. She was solid. She was alive. There had to be a mistake. Maybe someone had used the wrong stamp. Maybe the registry had not been updated. Maybe this was a different Margaret Holloway. But I knew it was not a mistake. I knew what I had seen. The yellow wristband. The confusion. The exact time on the registry matching the exact time I had encountered her. 2:34 a.m. The same time she had died 6 years ago. I closed the binder with trembling hands and walked quickly back to the common area, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath coming faster than it should. When I entered the room, the chair where I had left Margaret Holloway was empty. She was gone. I searched the entire room frantically, looked behind furniture, checked under tables, opened closets. There was no sign of her. She had vanished. Disappeared completely. I ran to the hallway, looked both ways, empty. I checked the stairwell, nothing. It was as if she had never been there at all. I returned to the nurse's station, my legs shaking so badly I could barely walk, and made another entry in the logbook. 2:34 a.m. Resident with yellow wristband encountered on second floor. Identified as female, elderly, confused, wearing pale blue nightgown. Escorted to common area as per Rule 2. Registry check at 2:39 a.m. confirmed deceased status. Subject: Margaret Holloway, room 3 at 12, deceased on 9/14/2019. Resident no longer present at 2:40 a.m. upon return to common area. Rule 2 followed. My handwriting was barely legible. the words shaking and uneven across the page. I did not sleep that day when I got home. I did not sleep for several days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret Holloway sitting in that chair, her lips moving silently, her eyes staring at nothing, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the registry was wrong. Maybe someone had made a clerical error. Maybe I had been so tired that I had hallucinated the whole thing, my exhausted brain creating phantoms out of shadows and silence. But I knew I had not imagined it. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had touched. And I knew that the rules were not just guidelines or superstitions or hazing rituals. They were warnings. They were protections. They were the thin line between sanity and something far worse. The third incident happened during my 4th week at Pinewood. And this time I saw something that made the previous encounters seem almost benign in comparison. I was walking past the west hallway on the 3rd floor making my 3 a.m. rounds when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. At the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of gray and shadow, was a figure. Someone was standing there, perfectly still, facing the wall like a child being punished. Rule 4. If you see someone standing at the end of the west hallway facing the wall, do not approach them or speak to them. Return to the nurse's station and wait until they are gone. I felt every muscle in my body tense. The figure was tall, much taller than any of the elderly residents, wearing what looked like a dark robe or gown that hung down to the floor. I could not see their face because they were turned away from me, their forehead pressed against the wall in an unnatural position, as if they were listening to something inside the walls themselves. They were not moving, not swaying, not breathing as far as I could tell. Just standing there in absolute silence, so still they could have been a statue. I took a step backward, my instincts screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that hallway as possible. But I forced myself to stay calm, to remember the rules. Do not approach, do not speak, just leave. I turned slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements, trying not to draw attention to myself, and walked as quietly as I could back toward the stairwell. My footsteps seemed incredibly loud in the silent hallway, each soft thud of my shoes on the carpet echoing like thunder. I did not look back. I did not want to know if the figure had turned around. I did not want to see what it looked like. I did not want it to see me. When I reached the nurse's station, I sat down heavily in the chair, my legs suddenly weak, and tried to steady my breathing. I looked at the security monitor that showed a grainy black and white feed of the 3rd floor hallways, cycling through different cameras every few seconds. The west hallway appeared on the screen, and I could see the figure still standing there motionless facing the wall. The image was poor quality, pixelated and washed out, but I could make out the dark shape at the end of the hall. I watched for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. The figure did not move, not even slightly. It stood there like a shadow made solid, like something that existed outside the normal flow of time. And then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., it was gone. One moment it was there on the screen, a dark shape against the pale wall. The next moment the hallway was empty. There was no movement, no transition, no walking away. It simply ceased to exist. I stared at the monitor in disbelief, blinking hard to make sure I was seeing correctly. I rewound the footage and watched it again. The figure was there and then it was not. Between one frame and the next, it had vanished as if it had never been there at all. I made another entry in the logbook. 2:53 a.m. Figure observed at end of west hallway, 3rd floor. Description: tall, wearing dark robe or gown, facing wall, completely motionless. Did not approach or speak to figure as per Rule 4. Returned to nurse's station. Figure remained visible on security monitor until 3:17 a.m., at which time it disappeared without observable movement or transition. Rule 4 followed. As I wrote, I noticed the entries from previous nights, previous years. Figure in west hallway observed. Did not approach. Figure disappeared at 3:17 a.m., the same time. Always the same time. Like clockwork. Like something trapped in an endless loop, appearing and disappearing at the exact same moments night after night, year after year. I was starting to realize that the logbook was filled with similar entries going back decades. Dozens of night shift workers had seen the same things I was seeing. The elevator moving to the 4th floor. the residents with yellow wristbands, the figure in the west hallway, and most of them had not stayed long enough to see much more. The ones who broke the rules, who tried to investigate, who thought they knew better than the accumulated wisdom of 30-plus years of night shift workers, those people did not last. And I was starting to understand why. I should have quit right then. I should have walked out of Pinewood retirement home and never looked back. But I needed the money desperately. My rent was due. My student loans were in forbearance but would not stay that way forever. I had no other job prospects in this small town where everyone knew each other, and newcomers were viewed with suspicion. And part of me, a small stubborn part that had always been too curious for my own good, wanted to understand what was happening. I wanted to know the truth, even if the truth was something I could not accept, something that would fundamentally change how I saw the world. The fourth incident was the one that broke me. It happened on a cold night in late October, nearly 2 months after I had started working at Pinewood. The temperature had dropped suddenly, and there was frost on the windows and that smell of winter coming that made everything seem more isolated, more lonely. I was doing my rounds on the second floor, checking each room methodically when I heard a sound that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was a scream, a high-pitched, desperate, terrified scream that echoed through the hallways and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, bouncing off the walls and ceiling until it was impossible to tell where it originated. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the source of the sound, my radio already in my hand, my thumb pressing the button. "This is Draven," I said into the radio, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "I have an emergency on the second floor. I need backup immediately. Someone is screaming. It sounds like they are in distress." There was no response, just static. I pressed the button again. "Helen, anyone?"
"Can you hear me?"
"I need help on the second floor." Still nothing, just the hiss and crackle of static, as if the radio waves were being blocked by something, absorbed by the walls themselves. I reached the east wing and saw that the door to room 237 was wide open. The light inside was off and I could see nothing but darkness beyond the threshold, a darkness that seemed deeper and more absolute than it should be, as if light itself was afraid to enter that space. Rule 3. Never enter room 237 if the door's already open. Close it from the hallway and report it in the logbook immediately. But the scream came again, and this time I could tell it was definitely coming from inside the room. It was a resident. Someone was in there and they were in trouble. They were terrified. They were suffering, and I could not just close the door and walk away. I could not let someone suffer because of some stupid rule that probably did not even mean anything. That was probably just superstition and paranoia, accumulated over decades of boring night shifts where nothing ever happened, and people made up stories to feel important. I stepped into the doorway, my flashlight raised, my beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone in here? Are you okay? I am here to help." And then I shone my light into the room, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life, will wake me up screaming in the middle of the night, will make me question everything I thought I knew about the world and death and what happens when we die. The room was empty. Completely empty. No bed, no furniture, no medical equipment, no nightstands or chairs or curtains or anything that should be in a resident's room. Just bare walls that looked like they had not been painted in decades, bare floor with boards that were warped and stained, and a single window with the curtains drawn, blocking out any moonlight that might have provided illumination. But in the center of the room, standing in a perfect circle, were 7 figures. They were all facing inward, toward the center of the circle, and they were all wearing the same pale blue nightgowns that the residents wore. Their heads were bowed as if in prayer, and their hands were clasped in front of them in a gesture of supplication or worship. And they were humming, all of them in perfect unison, a low, monotonous hum that vibrated through the air and made my teeth ache, made my bones vibrate, made something deep in my chest feel wrong. I recognized one of them immediately. It was Margaret Holloway, the woman with the yellow wristband, the woman who had been dead for over 5 years. She was standing in the circle, her white hair hanging limp around her face, her hands clasped, her lips moving in that endless hum. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper, coming out strangled and afraid. "Is everyone okay? What are you doing? Why are you in here?" The humming stopped, abruptly, completely. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. a suffocating absence of noise that pressed against my eardrums and made me want to scream just to break it. All 7 figures raised their heads in perfect unison, moving like puppets controlled by the same string, and turned to look at me. Their eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, no pupils. Just empty, bottomless voids that seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight, that seemed to reach into my soul and pull at something fundamental inside me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. One of the figures stepped forward, breaking the circle. It was an elderly man with hollow cheeks and skin that looked like old parchment, stretched too thin over his skull, yellow and translucent. His jaw hung open wider than it should be able to, unnaturally wide, and when he spoke, his voice was not his own. It was a chorus of voices, dozens of them, men and women and children, all speaking at once in perfect harmony, creating a sound that no human throat should be able to produce. "You should not be here," the voices said, echoing through the empty room. "This place is not for the living. You have broken the threshold. You have entered the space between. Now you belong to us." I turned and ran. I did not think. I did not try to help. I did not try to understand. I just ran as fast as I could, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls, my footsteps thundering in the hallway. I ran down the corridor, down the stairs, taking them 2 and 3 at a time, nearly falling, catching myself on the railing. I ran through the ground floor, past the nurse's station where papers scattered in my wake, through the front doors that I crashed through without bothering to open them properly, out into the cold night air that hit my face like a slap. I did not stop running until I reached my car in the parking lot, and even then I sat there with the engine running, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. My breath was fogging up the windows, and I could see the dark shape of Pinewood Retirement Home looming in my rearview mirror, its windows like empty eyes watching me. I fumbled for my cell phone with trembling hands and called Helen, nearly dropping the phone twice before I managed to dial her number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and I was afraid she would not answer, that I would be left alone with what I had just seen. But she picked up on the 4th ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "This is Helen." "There is something in room 237, I said, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form words, my teeth chattering even though I had the heat in the car turned up to maximum. "There are people in there. They are standing in a circle. They are not alive. They are not human. Their eyes are wrong. Their voices are wrong. Everything about them is wrong. I do not know what they are, but I cannot go back in there. I cannot do this anymore. I quit. I am done." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Helen breathing slowly, deliberately, as if she was choosing her words very carefully. Then her voice came through, calm and steady and somehow resigned. "You entered the room." "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "I heard someone screaming. I thought someone was hurt. I thought a resident needed help. I thought I was doing the right thing." "Rule 3, Helen said, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "Never enter room 237 if the door is already open." "You broke the rule, Draven. You were not supposed to see what is in there. No one is. The door opens sometimes on its own, as a test, as a temptation. We are supposed to close it and walk away. That is the rule. That is how we stay safe." "What are they?" I demanded, my voice rising with panic and anger. "What is happening in that place? Why are there dead people standing in circles? Why do their eyes look like that? What did they mean when they said I belong to them now?" Helen sighed, and I heard the weariness in her voice, the weight of 32 years of keeping secrets, of following rules she did not fully understand, of watching new employees come and go and sometimes never come back at all. "Pinewood was built on the site of an old sanatorium," she said quietly. "Back in the early 1900s, it was a place where people with mental illnesses were sent to be locked away and forgotten. It was called Willowbrook Sanatorium. The conditions were terrible, inhumane. Patients were abused, neglected, experimented on, left to die in their rooms without proper care or comfort. They used procedures that we would consider torture now. Lobotomies, ice baths, isolation chambers, shock therapy. Things that were legal then but would land someone in prison now. When the sanatorium was finally shut down in 1962 after a series of scandals and investigations, they found over 200 bodies buried in unmarked graves in the courtyard. Some of them had been there for decades. Some of them were never identified. The retirement home was built on top of it in 1968, and ever since then, strange things have been happening. The people you saw in room 237 are the ones who never left. They are still here, trapped between life and death, caught in some kind of loop or limbo. They are waiting for something we do not understand. Maybe they are waiting for justice. Maybe they are waiting for acknowledgement. Maybe they are just waiting for someone to remember them. I felt sick to my stomach. The coffee I had drunk earlier rose in my throat and I swallowed hard to keep it down. Why did you not tell me this before? Why did you let me take this job without knowing what I was walking into? Because if I had told you, you would not have taken the job, Helen said simply, stating the obvious truth. And we need someone on the graveyard shift. We need someone to make sure the residents are safe, to make sure the living and the dead stay separated, to make sure the rules are followed. The rules keep everything in balance. They keep the boundaries intact. As long as you follow them, everyone is safe. The dead stay in their places. The living sleep peacefully. But when you break them, when you cross the threshold, when you see what you are not supposed to see, she trailed off, and I did not need her to finish the sentence. I knew what she meant. What happens when you break them? I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer, though I was terrified of what she might say. Bad things, Helen said. Very bad things. You have been marked now, Draven. They have seen you. They have spoken to you. You are connected to them. You need to go back inside. You need to finish your shift. If you leave now, if you abandon your post, the door to room 237 will stay open and what is inside will come out. They will walk through the hallways. They will enter the rooms. They will touch the living residents. And people will die. Do you understand me? People will die because you broke the rule and then ran away. You need to go back. You need to close the door. You need to finish what you started. I did not want to understand. I did not want any of this to be real. But I looked back at the building, at the dark windows on the upper floors, and I knew Helen was telling the truth. I could feel it in the air, a wrongness that pressed down on me like a physical weight. A sense of something waiting, something hungry, something that had been patient for decades but was growing impatient now. I thought about the residents sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware of what was happening around them, unaware that their safety depended on someone following a set of rules that made no logical sense. I thought about what might happen if I left that door open, if those figures with their black eyes and chorus voices were allowed to roam free. What do? I asked, my voice small and defeated. Go back to room 237, close the door from the hallway. Do not look inside again. Do not speak to anything you see. Just close the door, lock it with your master key, and make the entry in the logbook. Then finish your rounds like nothing happened. Finish your shift, go home. And tomorrow you can decide if you want to come back or not. Can you do that, Draven? I wanted to say no. I wanted to drive away and never come back. To leave this cursed town and this haunted building and never think about any of it again. But I thought about the residents. Mrs. Patterson with her gentle smile. Mr. Kowalski, who always joked about the terrible food. Ms. Liu, who showed me pictures of her grandchildren every time. I checked on her. They were innocent. They deserved to be safe. They deserved to sleep peacefully without dead things wandering their hallways. I will do it, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. I hung up the phone, took several deep breaths to steady myself, and got out of the car. The walk back to the building felt like the longest walk of my life. Every step an act of will, every moment a battle against the instinct to run. The air was cold and I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The building loomed ahead of me, dark and silent, waiting. When I reached the front doors, I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the handle. Then I pushed them open and stepped inside. The building was silent. Too silent. The usual sounds, the hum of the vending machine, the buzz of the fluorescent lights, even the ticking of the old clock on the wall. All of it seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I walked through the ground floor, past the nurse's station where my cold coffee still sat on the desk, and up the stairs to the second floor. Each step creaked beneath my feet, the sound echoing in the empty stairwell. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes that floated in the air like tiny ghosts. When I reached the east wing, I saw that the door to room 237 was still open. The darkness beyond seemed deeper now, more oppressive, and I thought I could hear something. Not humming this time, but whispering. Dozens of voices whispering in unison. Too low for me to make out the words, creating a susurrus that made my skin crawl. I approached slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the doorframe, forcing myself not to look inside. I did not want to see if the figures were still there, if they were watching me, if they were waiting for me to cross the threshold again. I reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed the door handle. The metal was ice cold, so cold it burned my palm, so cold it made my fingers ache. I pulled the door closed with a sharp motion, using all my strength, and I heard the latch click into place with a sound that seemed too loud, too final. For a moment, nothing happened. The hallway remained silent. Then I heard it. A sound from inside the room. Not whispering now, but scratching. Like fingernails on wood or claws on metal. A dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the door vibrating beneath my hand as if something on the other side was trying to get out. Was pushing against the wood with enormous force. I stepped back quickly and pulled the master key from my belt. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key into the lock. The metal scraping against metal. My fingers clumsy with fear and cold. When I finally turned it, I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a heavy thunk that echoed down the hallway. The scratching stopped immediately, cut off as if a switch had been flipped. The door stopped vibrating. The hallway fell silent again. I stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, my heart racing, waiting for something else to happen. But the door remained closed. The hallway remained silent. Whatever was inside room 237 was locked away again, trapped behind that door, unable to reach me or anyone else. I walked back to the nurse's station on legs that felt like jelly and made the entry in the logbook. 3:42 a.m. Room 237 door found open. Heard screaming from inside. Made entry into room against Rule 3. Observed 7 figures standing in circle. Figures identified as non-living entities. Exited room immediately. Door closed and locked from hallway at 4:18 a.m. Rule 3 violated but corrected. My handwriting was barely legible, the letters shaking and uneven across the page. The rest of the night passed in a blur of terror and exhaustion. I completed my rounds mechanically, checking on residents without really seeing them, making notes in charts without really reading them. I sat at the nurse's station and watched the clock, counting down the minutes until 7 a.m. when the day shift would arrive and I could leave this place. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow made me flinch. I kept expecting to see figures in the hallways, to hear that humming, to feel those black eyes watching me. When Helen walked in at exactly 7 a.m. looking tired but alert, she looked at me with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been something else entirely, something like recognition or understanding. "You did well," she said quietly, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Not many people would have gone back inside after seeing what you saw. Not many people would have closed that door." I did not respond. I just gathered my things, clocked out, and walked to my car. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, but the light did not make me feel any better. When I got home, I collapsed on my bed fully clothed and slept for 14 hours straight. A deep, dreamless sleep that felt like death. And when I woke up, I knew I could not go back. I knew I could not spend another night in that building. Could not risk seeing those figures again. Could not risk hearing those voices. But here is the thing about working at Pinewood Retirement Home. The thing that Helen did not tell me. The thing I only discovered later. Once you have been there, once you have seen what happens during the graveyard shift, once you have broken the rules and crossed the threshold, you cannot forget it. The images stay with you. The sounds echo in your mind, and you start to notice things in the world around you that you never noticed before. The way shadows move in corners where there should be no movement. The way certain buildings feel wrong, like they are watching you, like they are breathing. The way some people have eyes that are just a little too dark, a little too empty, as if something behind them is not quite human. I gave my 2 weeks' notice the next day, calling Helen and telling her I could not continue, that I needed to leave for my own mental health. But she was desperate for coverage, and she begged me to work out at least the rest of the month. Just 2 more weeks, just until she could find someone else. And against my better judgment, against every instinct that told me to run and never look back, I agreed. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was something else. Some connection that had been formed when those black eyes looked at me, when those voices spoke to me, when I crossed the threshold into room 237. Those final 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I followed the rules religiously, obsessively, checking and rechecking the list Helen had given me, making sure I did everything exactly right. I did not investigate strange sounds. I did not approach figures in hallways. I did not enter rooms with open doors. I closed my eyes when I walked past room 237. I kept my head down, did my job, filled out the paperwork, and counted the hours until I could leave for good. But the incidents did not stop. If anything, they increased in frequency, as if the building knew I was leaving, as if it wanted to show me everything before I went, as if it wanted me to understand the full scope of what existed within those walls. On my third night of that final 2 weeks, I encountered Rule 5. I was walking past the recreation room on the ground floor at 2:45 a.m. when I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. That was unusual because the recreation room was always locked at night to prevent wandering residents from hurting themselves on the exercise equipment or choking on puzzle pieces. I approached cautiously and pushed the door open wider, shining my flashlight inside. The room looked normal. Television in the corner. Comfortable chairs, bookshelves, tables with jigsaw puzzles half finished. Exercise bike in the back. Everything exactly as it should be. I was about to close the door and continue my rounds when something strange happened. All the lights in the recreation room turned off simultaneously. Not flickering out one by one like a power failure, but all at once, as if someone had flipped every switch at the exact same moment. The room plunged into darkness so complete that even my flashlight seemed to barely penetrate it. Rule 5. If all the lights in the recreation room turn off simultaneously, do not turn them back on. Leave the room immediately and lock the door behind you until morning. My heart started racing. I took a step backward, my hand reaching for the door. But before I could pull it closed, I heard something. A sound from inside the darkened recreation room. It was laughter. Children's laughter. High-pitched and gleeful. The kind of sound that should be joyful, but in that context was absolutely terrifying. The laughter echoed through the darkness, coming from multiple directions, as if there were dozens of invisible children playing in that room. I stumbled backward into the hallway and grabbed the door, pulling it closed with all my strength. The laughter cut off abruptly as the door slammed shut. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking, and locked the door. Then I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the closed door, half expecting it to burst open, half expecting small hands to reach through the wood. But nothing happened. The door remained closed. The hallway remained silent. I made the entry in the logbook. 2:45 a.m. Recreation room lights extinguished simultaneously. Heard children's laughter from inside darkened room. Exited immediately and locked door as per Rule 5. Room to remain locked until morning shift arrival. Rule 5 followed. The next morning, when I mentioned the incident to Helen, she just nodded as if this was completely normal, completely expected. "The children," she said quietly. "They died in the old sanatorium. Measles outbreak in 1923. 47 children between the ages of 5 and 12. They were quarantined in what is now the recreation room. Most of them did not make it. They like to play there sometimes, late at night when the lights go out. As long as you do not disturb them, they are harmless. But if you turn the lights back on while they are playing," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Just follow the rules, Draven. Just a few more days." On my 6th night of that final 2 weeks, I experienced Rule 6, and it was the one that finally broke something fundamental inside me. The one that made me understand that I would never truly escape Pinewood. No matter how far I ran. It was 3:27 a.m., right in the middle of the forbidden hour mentioned in the rule. I was sitting at the nurse's station, drinking cold coffee and trying to stay awake when I heard it. Humming. Soft, melodic humming, coming from the direction of the garden courtyard. Not the harsh, vibrating hum from room 237, but something different. Something almost beautiful, almost peaceful. It sounded like a lullaby, like something a mother might sing to her child to help them sleep. Rule 6. If you hear humming coming from the garden courtyard between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., close all blinds facing the courtyard and do not look outside until the humming stops. I stood up immediately and walked to the west wing, where several large windows overlooked the courtyard. The blinds were already closed on most of them, but one set of blinds was open, the slats tilted to allow a view of the garden below. I reached for the cord to close them, but something made me stop. Curiosity. The same fatal curiosity that had made me enter room 237, that had made me break Rule 3 despite knowing better. The humming was so beautiful, so peaceful, so unlike everything else I had experienced at Pinewood. I wanted to see what was making that sound. I wanted to understand. I looked outside, and what I saw will haunt me until the day I die. The courtyard was bathed in pale moonlight, illuminating the overgrown flower beds with their dead roses and withered lilies, the cracked stone pathways that led nowhere, and the old fountain that had not worked in decades, its basin filled with stagnant water and dead leaves. And standing in the center of the courtyard, arranged in a perfect circle around the fountain, were the figures. Not 7 this time, not a dozen. Hundreds of them. Men, women, children, all wearing the same pale nightgowns that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, all facing inward toward the center of the circle, and they were humming. That same melodic lullaby that vibrated through the glass and made my bones ache with a strange longing I did not understand. In the center of the circle, right where the fountain stood, was a hole. A dark, gaping hole in the ground that looked like it led down into nothing, into some vast underground space that should not exist beneath the courtyard. The hole was perfectly round, maybe 6 feet in diameter, and the darkness inside it was absolute, deeper than any shadow should be. And as I watched, paralyzed with a mixture of fear and fascination, one of the figures stepped forward and dropped into the hole. They did not fall. They did not climb down. They simply stepped forward off the edge and descended into the darkness as if they were walking down a flight of invisible stairs, their feet finding purchase on air itself. Then another figure followed. And another. One by one they were disappearing into the earth, their humming growing fainter and fainter as they descended. I could not move. I could not breathe. I could not tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. I watched as figure after figure stepped into that hole and vanished, swallowed by the darkness below. And then I saw something that made my heart stop completely. One of the figures turned and looked directly at me. It was Margaret Holloway, the woman with the yellow wristband. The woman I had helped find her way. The woman who had been dead for 6 years. She was standing at the edge of the circle, and she turned her head slowly, deliberately, until she was facing the window where I stood. Her black eyes bored into mine even from that distance, across the courtyard through the glass, and then she smiled. It was not a human smile. It was too wide, splitting her face nearly in half, showing far too many teeth. Teeth that were too sharp, too white, too perfect. She raised one thin arm and pointed directly at me, her finger unnaturally long, her hand skeletal, and I heard her voice in my head, not through my ears but directly in my mind, a whisper that bypassed all my defenses. "You belong to us now," she said. "You crossed the threshold. You saw what you were not meant to see. You cannot leave. You will never leave. You will join us in the dark below. You will hum with us forever." I stumbled backward from the window, breaking the spell, breaking the connection. I grabbed the cord with shaking hands and yanked the blinds closed so hard that the cord snapped, and the blinds crashed down in a tangle of broken plastic and twisted metal. I heard the humming stop immediately, cut off as if someone had slammed a door, and the building fell into a deep, oppressive silence that pressed against my eardrums and made my head ache. I stood there in the darkness, my heart racing so fast I thought I might have a heart attack, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. I could still see Margaret Holloway's face in my mind, that terrible smile, those black eyes, that pointing finger. I could still hear her voice echoing in my head. "You belong to us now." I did not open the blinds again. I did not look outside. I could not. I returned to the nurse's station and sat there for the rest of the night, staring at the wall, my hands trembling, my mind trying desperately to process what I had seen and failing completely. I made the entry in the logbook. 3:27 a.m. Heard humming from garden courtyard as per Rule 6. Closed west wing blinds. Observed figures in courtyard before blinds fully closed. Rule 6 violated. I underlined the last sentence 3 times, my pen pressing so hard into the paper that it nearly tore through. When morning finally came and the day shift arrived, I turned in my keys, my radio, and my flashlight for the last time. I did not say goodbye to Helen. I did not explain what I had seen. I just walked out of Pinewood Retirement Home and never looked back. I got in my car and drove away from Millbrook, away from Pennsylvania, away from everything. I drove for 12 hours straight, not stopping except for gas. putting as much distance as I could between myself and that cursed building. That was 6 months ago. I have a new job now, working in a brightly lit office building in another state with big windows and dozens of coworkers and constant noise and activity. I work the day shift. I never work at night. I never work alone. And I never ever accept jobs that come with rules I do not understand. But sometimes late at night when I am trying to fall asleep in my new apartment in my new city hundreds of miles away from Pinewood, I hear it. That soft melodic humming, the lullaby from the courtyard. It is faint at first, barely audible over the sound of traffic outside and the neighbors upstairs and all the normal sounds of city life. But it grows louder gradually, night by night, week by week. And I know that whatever I saw at Pinewood, whatever was in that courtyard, whatever existed in that hole in the ground, it has not forgotten about me. Margaret Holloway pointed at me. She smiled at me. She spoke to me. And I cannot shake the feeling that one day, very soon, I will hear a knock on my door in the middle of the night. And when I open it, she will be standing there with her black eyes and her too wide smile and her skeletal hand reaching out to take mine. I do not know what I will do when that happens. I do not know if there are rules I can follow to keep myself safe anymore. I broke too many of them. I saw too much. I crossed too many thresholds. All I know is that some places are not meant for the living. Some buildings hold darkness that cannot be explained or understood or escaped. And some jobs pay well because they require you to stand guard between our world and something far worse, something hungry, something patient, something that has been waiting beneath the ground for decades and is finally ready to reach up and pull people down into the dark where it dwells. If you are ever offered a graveyard shift position at a retirement home, a hospital, a hotel, or any other place that operates 24 hours a day, ask about the rules first. If they give you a list like the one I was given, if they tell you to follow the rules exactly with no exceptions and no questions, think very carefully before you accept. Because once you see what happens during those dark hours between midnight and dawn, you cannot unsee it. Once you hear the voices, you cannot unhear them. Once you cross the threshold, you cannot go back. And once they mark you, once they point at you and smile and say you belong to them, you will never truly be free again. My name is Draven. I am 23 years old, and I worked the graveyard shift at Pinewood Retirement Home for exactly 2 months. That was long enough to learn that death is not always the end, that some souls never find peace, that some places are thin spots where the veil between worlds is so fragile it can be torn with a single misstep. I learned that rules exist for reasons we cannot always understand, and that breaking them has consequences we cannot always escape. I survived, but I am not sure for how much longer, because every night the humming gets a little bit louder. Every night I feel a little bit closer to that circle of figures standing in the moonlight, humming their endless lullaby, waiting for me to join them in the dark below. And every morning when I wake up, I check my wrist to make sure there is no yellow band there, no mark that would identify me as one of them, as someone who belongs to Pinewood even though I left months ago. If you ever find yourself at Pinewood Retirement Home in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, do not take the graveyard shift. Do not enter room 237 under any circumstances. Do not look into the courtyard between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Do not approach figures in hallways. Do not investigate strange sounds or open doors or crying voices. And whatever you do, do not let them see you watching. Because once they know you are there, once they mark you as someone who has crossed the threshold, they will never let you go. They will follow you across states and years and time itself. They will wait patiently in the dark, humming their lullaby, counting the nights until you finally give up and come home to them. Follow the rules. Trust me on this. Follow the rules exactly, with no exceptions and no creative interpretations, and maybe, just maybe, you will make it out alive and whole and unmarked. I only wish I had.